From my experience, I think it is possible to become more disciplined, for lack of a better term. It's possible to become more consistent. I've gone from someone who gave up reading to someone who reads 30, 40 books a year. Someone who didn't have a workout habit to someone who works out every week. Someone who dreaded the idea of a morning routine to someone who loves having a little morning routine. And more recently, I've been thinking about what it is that makes me more consistent in some areas than other areas. What rules I follow in those areas that make me a more disciplined person. And in this video, I boiled down those ideas into simple rules that anyone can follow in their life to build discipline. Rule number 1. In any relationship, trust is built when people keep their little promises. Your person says they'll be home at 8, they rock up at 8. You add a little marble to the trust jar until it gets to the point where they're so consistent, you don't even really think about it. But then imagine, same person says, I'll be home at 8, they rock up at 4 a.m. in the morning. That same person says, I'll see you on Friday, they cancel last minute and hang out with friends instead. The marbles start to disappear. Any promise that they make, you're kind of just like, yeah, okay, sure. When you set goals carelessly, you become that second example, but towards yourself, which is why the very first rule is never set goals carelessly. When you set goals carelessly, all your brain sees is you promising yourself that you'll make changes, and then it sees you not make those changes, and you take away those trust marbles one by one until you get to a point where whenever you set a goal or commit to something new, your brain's just like, yeah, okay, sure. Setting goals carelessly looks like vowing every Friday that on Monday you're going to get back to the gym, but not actually putting anything in place to make sure that on Monday you will get back to the gym. It looks like setting goals on a whim without asking yourself questions like, do I actually have time for this? How will I fit this in my week? Is this really a priority for me right now? How am I going to prioritize this in amongst all the other things I want to do? If you really want to take this and make this rule actionable, create a place where you have a list of your goals, one single place, and never ever put a new goal on that list until you've asked those questions, until you have the time, the headspace, and the commitment for that goal. Rule number 2, imagine that you move into a new house and you're excited to get everything set up. So you set all your furniture in place, your bits and bobs are all out, your drawers are filled. Are you gonna place everything in your new space perfectly? No. Almost for sure, in a few weeks, you'll be like, actually, I prefer this to be here. The exact same idea applies when you create new behaviors in your life, which is why the next rule to build discipline is if you set a goal, approach it iteratively. Expect not to get things perfect round 1. And the reason that this helps you to create discipline is because when you approach things iteratively, you respond better to setbacks because you expect them. You expect there to be a moment where you're like, this isn't working, I need to do something to change it, because you have an iterative mindset. One way to think of it is that whenever you set a goal in your life, all you're really doing is solving a problem. For example, if you set a goal to read more, the problem that you might actually be solving for is that you don't feel inspired. If you set a goal to start a business, the problem you might really be solving for is that you don't feel a lot of freedom in your life. Nearly every specific goal has an underlying, more vague problem that you're solving. And there are many different ways to solve that underlying vague goal, which is why an iterative approach can work so well. You'll often see engineering teams use an iterative approach when they're creating new features. They'll come up with a few iterations that they think are promising, test them to see whatever users like best, and then build on the one that is the most successful. Think about doing the same with your goals. Think of a few ways to solve that underlying problem. Try and dabble and see what feels best, and then stick with the one that feels the most promising. Rule number 3. Winston Churchill once said, the trick is to go from one failure to another with no loss of enthusiasm. But how do you do that? Through curiosity and planned reactions to your failure. Which is why the next rule to building discipline is, if you notice yourself going off track, have a planned reaction. Our reactions to failures and things not going our way are deeply habitual because it's stressful to fail. And studies show that when we're stressed or overwhelmed, we go into autopilot. That's why so many checklists are being used in emergency situations, because people get dumb when they're stressed. We need a checklist that guides us so that we're not doing dumb stuff. And the best thing that you can do for yourself to move from one failure to another with no loss of enthusiasm is to create a checklist that's based in curiosity. Treat failures as a time to get curious, not critical. For example, you started out this year with every intention to exercise regularly. You haven't been exercising regularly. You want to ask yourself questions like, what was the actual sticking point? Like, what was it about exercising that didn't do it for me? Did I not enjoy the actual exercise, or was I just struggling to get out of bed in the morning? What assumptions am I making here? On Instagram, I actually created almost a checklist that you could go back to and compare all of your goals against, titled The 9 Reasons Why You Haven't Achieved Your Goals Yet in 2023. You can use that Instagram post to help fuel your checklist. Rule number 4. If you are setting a new goal for yourself, what question do you think it is more helpful to ask? What is the most impactful way to approach this goal? How can I change my life the most? What is the most enjoyable, most easy way to approach this? The best answer is number 2. And that's because what is most impactful isn't always what sticks. What is fun and easy sticks. For example, I'm trying to make more meals at home. For sure, I could go out and get a healthy recipe book and create myself a set meal plan using those healthy recipes. But instead, I've gone on TikTok. I've found creators that I'm like, oh, they seem cool. I've looked for meals that are similar to the takeout meals that I get. I've tried to find meals that have a ton of comments from people being like, I made this last night and it was so good, because social proof really does it for me. Is my approach going to be more impactful than finding a Whole Foods healthy recipe book and creating a meal plan? I would argue yes, because I'm more likely to follow through on it. And the most impactful plan is the one that you actually follow through on consistently. Only optimizing for benefits and impact is a pathway to failure. You need to optimize for enjoyment and ease. Rule number 5. When water is super limited, farmers will give their plants the bare minimum amount of water to keep them from withering. At that point, they're just trying to sustain plant survival, not necessarily growth. You want to do the same thing when your resources are low. Your resources being your time, your energy, and your enthusiasm. Stephen Guys said, to prioritize consistency means to set your marks low enough that you won't ever miss. It means making your minimum requirement showing up instead of showing off. You guys know that I implement this in my own life a lot. I use little habit menus in my morning routine. And for each habit, my bare minimum is just showing up. When I meditate, I'll sometimes meditate for 5 minutes, sometimes I'll meditate for 20 minutes. And I think what's important to note is that I don't see my 5-minute days as any worse than my 20-minute days. Some days, all you are doing is maintaining the bare minimum, which sounds really small, but similar to when farmers need to just water their plants the bare minimum, what you're doing is stopping your habits from withering. That's the point of this rule. Rule number 6. Imagine if right now I said, go on a 10-minute walk. You'd probably be like, I need to put on my shoes, the weather, my energy, etc. Imagine if you were already outside, you were already walking, and I was like, hey, go on a 10-minute walk. You'd probably be like, yeah, I can do that. I'm already moving. It's easy enough to keep on moving. Which is why the next rule to build discipline is, when you feel demotivated, use momentum creators. Get yourself moving. An analogy that I heard recently is that feelings are like friends giving you advice. They mean well, but you shouldn't always heed the advice of your friends. But often we treat our feelings more like dictators. When we're feeling demotivated, we're like, okay, my mind is telling me that it doesn't want to do this, therefore I will scroll on TikTok instead. Our reactions to feeling demotivated and feeling like we don't want to do things, they are habits that we can change. And the habit that you want to build is feel demotivated, use momentum creators. If you haven't heard me talk about momentum creators before, these are the little mental and physical tricks that you use to get yourself moving. And you should have a toolkit full of them. I'm gonna have a playlist linked down below that is my playlist of all of my little momentum creators, or bounce back tools is something else I call them, that get me moving when I really don't feel like doing anything. Rule number 7. A newsletter that I subscribed to recently told the story of Dan Nosson, a former US Navy SEAL turned Paralympian skier. Dan's mantra is let it go and refocus. So during a 15-kilometer cross-country race, Dan fell face forward. He tumbled, lost control, he was bloody, it was not a good time. And immediately, of course, his thoughts went to, everyone's so far ahead of me, I'll never be able to make up this time. He let it go and he refocused on what he could control. He had 34 minutes to work his way back into the lead, and he ended up with a silver medal. Which leads to our next rule for building discipline. You are ruminating on what you cannot control. Let it go and refocus on what you can. I think that embracing this rule is the difference between a victim mindset and a hero mindset. Of course, when you're reading a book, the hero occasionally will get down in the dumps on their circumstances, on the cards that they've been dealt, on the bad things that have happened. But they always let it go and refocus on what they can control. They don't stay ruminating, because ruminating is a waste of time. Dan, the guy who really owned this mantra, didn't just come to it organically. He spent years letting his thoughts go and refocusing on his breath and meditation practice, which is one of the most helpful things that you can do to really embrace this rule. The other thing that you can do is, whenever you notice yourself focusing on all the things that you can't control, ruminating on stuff that just isn't in your power to influence, draw a circle of control. This is a journaling exercise that I find helpful sometimes. On the outside, you have your circle of concern, so the things that you're concerned about. Then you have your circle of influence, things that you can influence. And then in the middle, you have all of the things that you actually can control in the situation. And that's where you want to put your focus. If you liked this video, the next video that you should watch is my video on you can build discipline, here's how. I'm gonna have that link down below. It has some different ideas that I haven't shared in this video, so it's the perfect continuation of this video. The link will be in the description. I appreciate you so much, and I'll see you soon.